Now, you're lucky to come across this in your lifetime. Most people believe they are free because they are allowed to choose. Choose who to vote for, choose what to watch, choose what to buy, choose what to believe. Freedom, we are told, is the presence of options. But this episode asks a quieter question: who designs the options? Because when choices are pre-selected, freedom becomes a feeling, not a condition. This is not about dictatorships or obvious censorship. This is about modern systems that allow expression, encourage participation, and still guide outcomes with remarkable consistency. This is The Illusion of Choice. Episode 4, The Illusion of Choice: Politics, Media, and Modern Freedom. Part 1, Choice as a Control Mechanism. Why choice feels like freedom. Choice feels empowering. It creates ownership. When people choose, they feel responsible for outcomes. This emotional ownership is critical because systems that rely on choice don't need obedience. They need buy-in. The difference between range and direction, having options does not mean having freedom. If all available paths lead in roughly the same direction, choice becomes cosmetic. Different routes, same destination. This is how control modernizes. Politics is managed variation. In many political systems, competition exists. Debates are loud. Personalities clash. Language differs. But foundational structures remain untouched. Economic models persist. Banking systems remain unchanged. Foreign policy stays predictable. What changes is tone, not trajectory. Why conflict is encouraged, division is useful? It creates engagement without threatening structure. People argue horizontally, party against party, group against group, rarely vertically toward systems themselves. Conflict absorbs attention, and attention is finite. Participation as legitimacy. Voting creates legitimacy, not because outcomes change dramatically, but because participation implies consent. Once people engage, the system is validated, even when dissatisfaction remains. This is not deception, it is psychology. Media and the shape of possibility. Media doesn't tell people what to think. It tells them what is thinkable, which topics are serious, which are fringe, which questions are acceptable. The boundaries are subtle, but they are firm. The invisible fence. Most people never encounter censorship, they encounter omission. Certain ideas are never presented as viable, and what is never presented rarely feels missing. Once choice is framed and boundaries are set, the next step is reinforcement, because belief must be maintained. That reinforcement comes through repetition. Part 2, Media, Narratives, and Repetition. Why repetition matters more than censorship. Modern control rarely silences ideas. It outnumbers them. An idea does not disappear because it is banned. It disappears because it is drowned. When certain narratives are repeated across platforms, across formats, across voices, they begin to feel natural. Not because they are true, but because they are familiar. How consensus is manufactured. Consensus does not require agreement. It requires saturation. When the same assumptions appear, in news and entertainment, in advertising and expert commentary, they stop feeling like opinions. They become background reality. This is how beliefs are stabilized without enforcement. The role of experts. Experts provide legitimacy, not necessarily accuracy. Legitimacy. When authority figures repeat similar frameworks, debate becomes limited to minor disagreements. The core assumptions remain untouched. This creates the appearance of diversity within controlled boundaries. Speed as a control tool. Modern media moves fast. Stories change daily. Outrage cycles reset constantly. This speed prevents depth. Before questions can mature, attention is redirected. What cannot be examined cannot be challenged. Emotion over analysis. Media prioritizes emotion. Fear, anger, moral urgency. Emotional reactions bypass reflection. They keep people responsive, but not reflective. A responsive audience is easy to steer. A reflective audience is not. Simplicity wins. Complex explanations require patience. Simple narratives spread faster. Good versus bad. Us versus them. Crisis versus solution. Systems prefer simplicity because it prevents structural questioning. The illusion of independent thinking. People believe they arrive at conclusions independently, but conclusions are shaped by available inputs. If all roads lead through the same information corridors, independent thinking still converges. Freedom of thought requires freedom of context. Why alternative voices struggle. Alternative perspectives are not always suppressed. They are labeled extreme, unserious, unreliable. This framing discourages engagement without banning access. People avoid ideas that risk social cost. Normalization through entertainment. Entertainment plays a quiet role. Values are modeled, lifestyles are normalized, outcomes are justified. When narratives are absorbed passively, they bypass skepticism. Entertainment teaches without appearing to instruct. Once narratives are repeated and beliefs stabilize, the final layer emerges. People begin to defend the choices they were given. This is where illusion becomes identity. Part 3. Identity, choice, and self-defense. How choice becomes personal. Once options are framed, boundaries are set, and narratives are repeated, people begin to identify with their choices. Political preferences, media consumption, lifestyle selections. These choices feel personal, like authentic expressions of self, but they are guided by the structures they operate within. Defending the illusion. Humans naturally defend their sense of autonomy. When someone questions a system of managed options, people often react defensively. I chose freely. I make my own decisions. I know better than others. This is self-reinforcement. Even when the system is restrictive, defenders perceive it as validating freedom. The role of social pressure. Identity is reinforced socially. Choices are discussed publicly. Opinions are shared online. Tribes are formed. Deviation threatens belonging. The fear of social cost ensures compliance without explicit rules. Participation as consent voting. Consumer decisions. Media engagement. Every act of participation signals agreement with the boundaries of choice, not necessarily with outcomes, not necessarily with intent, but the system interprets engagement as consent. Self-policing becomes natural. Once internalized, people monitor themselves. They avoid exploring unthinkable alternatives. They defend familiar narratives. They prioritize belonging over curiosity. Control no longer requires enforcement. It has been absorbed. Why this system is stable? Systems that allow participation but restrict meaningful alternatives are exceptionally stable. People defend constraints voluntarily. They explain limitations as personal preference. They rationalize boundaries as freedom. Resistance exists, but is rare, isolated, and framed as anomaly. At this point, the system is largely complete. Options exist. Narratives guide interpretation. People internalize rules. Participation validates the structure. The final question emerges. Why does it feel impossible to step outside entirely? Part 4. Why true freedom is rare. Even with options, awareness, and participation, true freedom is difficult to achieve. Because freedom is not just the ability to choose. It is the ability to act without invisible constraints. Invisible fences exist everywhere. Economic pressures, social expectations, normalized narratives, structural boundaries. All are subtle, all are effective. People rarely see them, and those who do often underestimate their weight. Choice is illusion. Choice remains real, technically, but the trajectory of consequences is constrained. Jobs, education, media, politics, social mobility, all remain within acceptable parameters. The system allows participation, but limits transformation. You may feel empowered, but empowerment is framed. The system protects itself. The most stable systems do not ban questioning. They channel it. Debate is allowed on details. Disagreement is tolerated within boundaries. Criticism is absorbed, neutralized, or redirected. When people feel responsible for their choices, they defend boundaries. They reinforce limitations. They normalize constraint. Control has become internalized. The real first step. Episode 4 is not about despair, it is about clarity. Understanding this system does not give instant freedom. It provides perspective. Why certain options feel natural. Why deviation feels risky. Why participation reinforces constraint. Awareness allows deliberate navigation even within boundaries. The illusion of choice is subtle. It feels empowering. It feels personal. It feels free. But it is guided, contained, managed. In the next episode, we will explore how systems of money, debt, and choice intersect with global politics, and why understanding these connections is essential for anyone seeking genuine agency. Remember, freedom begins with seeing clearly. See clearly, and you move differently. I'll see you in episode 5.